I've heard you describe this in other settings as you've compared it to the telecommunications revolution that happened in the early 2000s.
That's right.
And obviously, as you mentioned, there were some different regulatory hurdles that occurred there. But ultimately, telecommunications became a service-driven business, and you're suggesting that the utility industry has to follow that model as well.
I'm suggesting that's one path.
Okay.
I'm suggesting that's one option. Right. What we saw in the telecommunication industry was monetization of the wires to monetization of the electrons, right? Mm-hmm. That's sort of what occurred over a decade, where basically, the wires became a commodity. And I think we're seeing the same thing here. The wires are increasingly becoming a commodity. The assets within the grid itself are becoming commodities, right? And what we saw was the telecommunication, actually the industry in itself really moved to transform itself, right, ahead of regulation. And they're very aggressively driving the regulation and regulatory environment in order to be able to monetize this, emerging opportunity in generating value out of the electrons that they're transferring, right? So the telecommunication companies became service providers. They made that transition from becoming network providers to systems to service providers, in that they began to understand that there was much more value in the electrons that they were moving around than the wires that were used to move those electrons, right? I believe that recognition exists in the utility industry, in some of the utilities that I've spoken to in North America, as well as you have, as well as Europe. I believe that the utility industry could and probably should be more proactively driving regulation in shaping the outcome, as the telecommunications companies did. But I don't see that happening yet, right? Again, the choices are, I will become a network operator and I'll continue doing that, and that's a good business and has a rate of return. It's a set rate of return. It's still needed. It's not going to go away, right? As a distribution company or even a transmission company, they're not going to go away. Even to some extent, generation companies are not going to go away, right? You still need some of that central generation.
Certainly for the foreseeable future.
Certainly for the foreseeable future, and they could operate at at a commodity asset level, or they could push for regulation and open up, expand that a little bit so that they could begin to create services and deliver those services on top of that infrastructure, on top of the electrons that they're delivering. I know it's a little bit abstract at this point, but I think the choices are, we either say, fine, we're going to be network operators, or no, let's push the envelope on the regulatory front, on the commercial front, on our capabilities, challenge ourselves, challenge the industry, challenge the regulators, and let's become more of a service provider like the telecom did.
Yeah, and I would think they'd have to go even beyond the regulators and go to some policymakers and get some new regulations on the book to do that.
Absolutely. We saw the telcos become very active in that. They were very proactive in driving that. I'd like to see the same thing in the utility, happen in the utility industry, because I think we're long overdue for it.
So we've talked about the challenges facing the utility industry, and I look back at the 100-plus year history of the industry, from the first electrification revolution to the post-World War II electrification transformation, where electric appliances started to come into people's homes. And it seems to me that while there are these challenges, we are at the cusp of this third great revolution as well, that digital is the backbone for. Can you talk to me a little bit about some of those opportunities that utilities will have if they can make that successful transition to being digital, to being digital?
So digital is a very interesting topic, right?
Sure.
Digital is a pretty vast topic, and I think when we talk about digital, we could really talk about two things. One is the use of digital technologies in creating efficiencies and optimization of our own company processes, what we do internally, right? This is almost akin to what happened with internet, in the early, well, actually mid to late 1990s, right? Internet initially was used internally and more to B2B and internally within the enterprise to optimize processes, to optimize business processes, to optimize the systems, to gain efficiencies and more agility in the industry. So that's definitely, that hasn't changed. That definitely is one dimension of digital. So utilities, and I didn't mean to imply that, before that utilities had to apply digitalization only to create new services. So there is still that dimension to be explored. And I think there's a lot of room and opportunity there in terms of bringing the digital technologies into the utility infrastructure itself, digitalizing, sensoring the substations, sensoring the transformers, sensoring the lines, collecting all that data information, correlating that with weather and correlating that with all sorts of other business attributes or systems, and really making that much more effective and much more efficient. And even to great extents, automating and autonomizing the grid itself. So there's still significant value to be derived from application of digital technologies and capabilities within the grid itself and within their business. So that's that one dimension that I think is still of great value. It's not really dependent on regulatory changes. It's fairly straightforward. A lot of technology already exists, and it's really a matter of building the right business case, right? And just really looking at it from that perspective as to where that value is going to come from in terms of automation or even autonomization of that infrastructure or the business processes. So there's definitely that dimension in play, and I think that dimension will be in play for a long time.
Right.
The second dimension of digitalization is around your products and services and what you can do to enable better products and services and the agility and increased value in the products and services that you deliver as a result of the use of technology, right? And that's where we spent a good amount of time talking about, transition from being just an electron provider or wires to move electrons, volume, right, and assets and infrastructure to become more of a service provider. So that dimension is also very much in play, and that dimension is definitely playing out in the unregulated space much more aggressively than it is in the regulated space.